The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as Camilla, the queen consort, stepped out of her private quarters with determination in her eyes. She had been thinking about this decision for weeks, and today was the day she would finally act on it. Her stepson Tom Parker Bowles had just turned 25, and she wanted to give him something truly special for his birthday. As she walked through the castle corridors, her heels clicking against the ancient stone floors, Camilla's mind was made up. She had seen the way Tom's eyes lit up whenever he spotted the late Queen Elizabeth's famous Range Rover parked in the royal garage. It was a magnificent vehicle, forest green with gleaming chrome details, and it had been the Queen's personal favorite for her countryside drives. The Range Rover had a story of its own. Queen Elizabeth had driven it herself for over 15 years, taking it on countless trips to Balmoral and around the Windsor estate. It was more than just a car. It was a piece of royal history. The leather seat still held the faint scent of the Queen's favorite lavender perfume, and the glove compartment contained her reading glasses and a small notebook where she jotted down observations about the wildlife she encountered during her drives. Camilla remembered how the Queen used to speak fondly of that vehicle, calling it her trusty companion. During their private conversations, the Queen had mentioned how the Range Rover gave her a sense of freedom and normalcy that few other things in her royal life could provide. It was in this very car that she had driven to some of her most peaceful moments, away from the cameras and the constant scrutiny of public life. Now, as the new Queen consort, Camilla felt it was her right to make decisions about the royal vehicles. After all, King Charles had given her considerable authority over household matters, and she genuinely believed that giving the Range Rover to Tom would be a meaningful gesture. Tom had always been respectful to the royal family, and he had shown genuine grief when Queen Elizabeth passed away. The idea had first come to her during a quiet evening when she and Charles were discussing family matters. Tom had been struggling to establish himself in his career, and Camilla thought that having such a prestigious vehicle might boost his confidence and social standing. She imagined how proud he would be to drive something that had belonged to his step-grandmother, and how it would strengthen his connection to the royal family. As Camilla made her way toward the royal garage, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She knew that some people might question her decision, but she was confident that she was doing the right thing. The Queen was gone, and it seemed wasteful to let such a beautiful vehicle sit unused in the garage when it could bring joy to someone who would truly appreciate it. The royal garage was the impressive building that housed dozens of vehicles, from state cars to personal automobiles. As Camilla entered, she was greeted by the familiar smell of polished leather and motor oil. The Range Rover sat in its designated spot, looking as magnificent as ever despite not being driven for months. She ran her hand along the smooth paintwork, remembering the last time she had seen Queen Elizabeth behind the wheel. It had been just a few weeks before her passing, when the Queen had insisted on driving herself to visit the horses in the stable. Even in her final days, the Queen had maintained her independence and her love for that particular vehicle. Camilla pulled out her phone and called the head of royal transportation. She explained her intentions clearly and confidently, instructing him to prepare the Range Rover for transfer to Tom. She wanted it to be cleaned, serviced, and ready for presentation by the weekend. The man on the other end of the phone seemed surprised but didn't question her authority. After ending the call, Camilla spent a few more minutes in the garage, sitting in the driver's seat of the Range Rover and trying to imagine what the Queen must have felt during her many journeys in this vehicle. The seat adjusted perfectly to her height, and she could see why the Queen had loved it so much. The commanding view of the road, the comfortable interior, and the sense of power and control, it was easy to understand the appeal. As she prepared to leave the garage, Camilla felt satisfied with her decision. She was looking forward to seeing Tom's face when she presented him with the keys. She imagined how grateful he would be, and how this gesture would strengthen their relationship. In her mind, she was not just giving away a car. She was passing on a piece of royal legacy to someone who would treasure it. 3 days later, the preparations were complete. The Range Rover had been thoroughly cleaned and serviced, its engine purring like a contented cat. Camilla had arranged for Tom to come to Windsor Castle under the pretense of a family lunch, keeping the real surprise hidden from him. She had even asked the staff to park the vehicle in a special location where she could dramatically reveal it to him. Tom arrived at the castle in his usual cheerful manner, expecting nothing more than a pleasant meal with his stepmother. He had always maintained a good relationship with Camilla, appreciating how she had brought stability and happiness to his father's life. As they enjoyed lunch in the private dining room, Camilla found it difficult to contain her excitement about the surprise she had planned. During their conversation, Tom mentioned his ongoing search for a reliable car. His current vehicle had been giving him trouble, and he was saving money to buy something better. Camilla smiled knowingly, thinking about how perfectly timed her gift would be. She listened as he talked about his work and his plans for the future, feeling more convinced than ever that she was making the right decision. After lunch, Camilla suggested they take a walk around the grounds. She led Tom toward the area where the Range Rover was waiting, her heart beating faster with each step. She had rehearsed what she would say, wanting the moment to be perfect. As they rounded the corner and the magnificent vehicle came into view, Tom stopped in his tracks. The Range Rover looked absolutely stunning in the afternoon sunlight. Every surface gleamed, from the polished paintwork to the chrome details that caught the light. Tom's eyes widened in appreciation as he took in the sight of the famous vehicle that he had admired so many times before. Camilla watched his face carefully as she began her speech. She told him about how much the Queen had loved this particular car, and how she had driven it on countless journeys around the royal estates. She described the special connection the Queen had felt with the vehicle, and how it had represented freedom and independence for her. Then came the moment Camilla had been anticipating. She reached into her purse and pulled out the keys, holding them up so they caught the sunlight. Tom's expression changed from admiration to confusion, then to disbelief as Camilla explained that she wanted him to have the Range Rover as a birthday gift. Tom was speechless for several moments, staring at the keys in Camilla's outstretched hand. He looked from the keys to the car and back again, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. When he finally found his voice, he expressed his amazement and gratitude, but also his concern about accepting such an incredibly valuable and historically significant gift. Camilla reassured him that the decision was entirely hers to make, and that she genuinely wanted him to have the vehicle. She explained how she believed the Queen would have approved of her choice, given Tom's respectful attitude toward the royal family and his genuine appreciation for the monarchy's traditions. As Tom accepted the keys with trembling hands, Camilla felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She was passing on a piece of royal history to someone who would value it properly, and she was strengthening the bonds within their blended family. The moment felt perfect, filled with emotion and significance. Tom walked around the Range Rover slowly, running his hands along its surfaces and peering through the windows at the luxurious interior. Camilla pointed out various features that the Queen had particularly enjoyed, including the special seat adjustments and the built-in navigation system that had been customized for royal use. When Tom finally started the engine, the powerful rumble filled the air, and Camilla could see the joy and excitement on his face. She felt proud of her decision and confident that she had done something meaningful and generous. The Range Rover would have a new life with someone who would appreciate its history and significance. As they prepared to complete the transfer of ownership, Camilla made sure that Tom understood the responsibility that came with owning such a special vehicle. She reminded him of its historical importance and asked him to treat it with the respect it deserved. Tom solemnly promised to take excellent care of the Range Rover, understanding that he was now the custodian of a piece of royal heritage. Word of Camilla's generous gift spread quickly through the castle staff, and not everyone was pleased with the news. Among those who heard about the transfer was Senior Royal Protection Officer James Morrison, a man who had served the royal family faithfully for over 20 years. Morrison had been personally assigned to Queen Elizabeth's security detail for the last decade of her life, and he had developed a deep respect and affection for the late monarch. Morrison was in the security office, reviewing duty schedules when one of the junior guards mentioned seeing Tom Parker Bowles driving away from the castle in the Queen's famous Range Rover. At first, Morrison thought there must be some mistake. Surely the Queen's personal vehicle wouldn't be given away so casually, especially not to someone outside the immediate royal family. He immediately called the head of royal transportation to verify the information. When the man confirmed that Queen Consort Camilla had indeed authorized the transfer of the vehicle to her stepson, Morrison felt a surge of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just any car, it was a piece of living history, a vehicle that had been intimately connected to Queen Elizabeth's daily life and personal routine. Morrison remembered countless occasions when he had ridden in that Range Rover as part of the Queen's security detail. He had watched her carefully check her mirrors, adjust her seat to the perfect position, and set off on her beloved drives around the countryside. The vehicle had been more than transportation for the Queen. It had been a source of independence and joy during the final years of her life. The security officer had also been present during some of the Queen's most private moments in that car. He remembered the day she had driven to visit her beloved corgis' graves, sitting quietly in the Range Rover for nearly an hour as she reflected on her losses. He recalled another occasion when she had used the vehicle to make an unscheduled visit to a local village after hearing about a young child's illness, wanting to offer her support without the usual fanfare of an official royal visit. These memories made Morrison feel that Camilla's decision was not just inappropriate, but deeply disrespectful to the Queen's memory. In his view, the Range Rover should have been preserved as part of the royal collection, perhaps displayed in a museum or kept as a memorial to the late monarch. The idea that it was now being used as a casual gift for a family member struck him as fundamentally wrong. Morrison's anger was compounded by the fact that he hadn't been consulted about the decision. As the senior security officer who had been most closely associated with the Queen's use of the vehicle, he felt that his opinion should have been sought before such a significant decision was made. He knew every detail about that Range Rover's security features, its maintenance history, and its special significance to the Queen. The security officer decided that he couldn't let this matter rest without taking action. He began researching the proper protocols for handling royal property, particularly items that had belonged to deceased monarchs. He discovered that there were indeed established procedures for dealing with personal effects in vehicles, and he wasn't convinced that those procedures had been properly followed in this case. Morrison also reached out to other long-serving members of the royal household, including several who had worked closely with Queen Elizabeth. He found that many of them shared his concerns about the Range Rover's transfer. Some expressed surprise that such a historically significant vehicle had been given away so quickly after the Queen's death, while others questioned whether Camilla had the authority to make such decisions unilaterally. As Morrison gathered more information and support for his position, his determination to challenge the decision grew stronger. He felt that he had a duty to protect the Queen's legacy and to ensure that her personal possessions were treated with the respect they deserved. The Range Rover represented more than just a valuable car. It was a tangible connection to the beloved monarch who had served the nation so faithfully for so many decades. The security officer began preparing a formal complaint, documenting his concerns and outlining the reasons why he believed the transfer should be reversed. He planned to present his case to the highest levels of the royal household, arguing that the Range Rover should be returned and properly preserved as part of the Queen's legacy. Morrison's colleagues watched with interest as he built his case against Camilla's decision. Some supported his position, believing that he was right to stand up for the Queen's memory and the proper handling of royal property. Others worried that challenging the Queen Consort so directly could have serious consequences for his career and his standing within the royal household. As word of Morrison's investigation spread through the castle staff, tension began to build. The security officer was known for his uncompromising dedication to duty and his fierce loyalty to the late Queen, qualities that had earned him respect throughout his career. Now those same qualities were putting him on a collision course with the current Queen Consort, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test the limits of royal protocol and personal loyalty. Morrison spent the next week meticulously building his case against the Range Rover transfer. He compiled documentation about the vehicle's history, its significance to Queen Elizabeth, and the proper protocols for handling royal property. His research revealed that similar items from previous monarchs had been carefully preserved and catalogued, becoming part of the permanent royal collection rather than being given away as personal gifts. The security officer also discovered that the Range Rover had been specifically mentioned in some of the Queen's personal writings as being particularly dear to her. In a private journal entry that had been shared with close staff members, the Queen had written about how the vehicle represented her ability to maintain some independence, even in her advanced years. She had described it as her faithful companion and had expressed hope that it would be cared for properly after her death. Armed with this information, Morrison requested a formal meeting with the Lord Chamberlain, the senior official responsible for overseeing the royal household. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving Morrison time to prepare his presentation and gather additional support from other concerned staff members. During this period, Morrison's investigation began to attract attention beyond the immediate circle of castle staff. Word reached some of the Queen's former private secretaries, several of whom expressed their own concerns about the hasty disposal of the monarch's personal effects. They shared Morrison's view that important items like the Range Rover should be preserved for posterity, rather than distributed as family gifts. Meanwhile, Camilla remained unaware of the growing opposition to her decision. She had received a thank-you note from Tom, along with photos of him proudly posing with the Range Rover, and she felt satisfied that she had made the right choice. The positive reaction from Tom reinforced her belief that the Queen would have approved of her decision to pass the vehicle on to someone who would truly appreciate it. However, tensions within the castle staff continued to escalate. Morrison's supporters began to speak more openly about their concerns, while others argued that challenging the Queen Consort's authority was inappropriate and potentially dangerous to their careers. The royal household, normally a model of discretion and unity, was becoming divided over the controversy. The situation became more complicated when news of the dispute reached King Charles. Initially, he was reluctant to get involved in what he saw as a minor family matter. Charles had given Camilla considerable authority over household decisions, and he generally trusted her judgment. However, as the controversy grew and began to affect staff morale, he realized that he might need to intervene. Charles found himself in a difficult position. On one hand, he wanted to support his wife's decision and maintain her authority within the royal household. On the other hand, he recognized that the concerns being raised by Morrison and others had some validity. The Range Rover was indeed a significant piece of royal history, and its disposition deserved careful consideration. The king decided to speak privately with Camilla about the situation before Morrison's formal meeting with the Lord Chamberlain. During their conversation, Charles gently explained the concerns that had been raised by the security officer and other staff members. He emphasized that while he supported her right to make such decisions, it might be wise to consider the broader implications of her choice. Camilla was initially defensive about her decision, arguing that she had every right to dispose of the Queen's property as she saw fit. She pointed out that Tom was a member of their extended family, and that the Range Rover would be well cared for in his hands. She also expressed frustration that her authority was being questioned by subordinate staff members. However, as Charles explained the depth of feeling among the castle staff and the potential for the controversy to become public, Camilla began to reconsider her position. She had not realized how emotionally attached many people had been to the Queen's personal possessions, or how strongly they felt about preserving her legacy. The conversation between Charles and Camilla was respectful but tense, reflecting the delicate balance between personal relationships and royal protocol. Both recognized that how they handled this situation would set important precedents for future decisions about royal property and the authority of the Queen Consort. As the day of Morrison's formal meeting approached, the atmosphere in the castle grew increasingly strained. Staff members found themselves choosing sides in a dispute that touched on fundamental questions of respect, authority, and the proper way to honor the memory of the beloved late Queen. The Range Rover had become a symbol of much larger issues within the royal household. Morrison continued his preparations, knowing that his career might depend on how skillfully he presented his case. He was determined to speak truth to power, regardless of the personal consequences, because he believed that protecting the Queen's legacy was more important than protecting his own position. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of royal protocol and personal loyalty. The morning of Morrison's meeting with the Lord Chamberlain arrived with an unusual tension hanging over Windsor Castle. Staff members moved through their duties with subdued efficiency, aware that something significant was about to unfold. Morrison had spent the early hours reviewing his notes one final time, ensuring that every detail of his argument was perfect. At exactly 10 o'clock, Morrison knocked on the ornate door of the Lord Chamberlain's office. The room was impressive, with tall windows overlooking the castle grounds and walls lined with portraits of former royal officials. The Lord Chamberlain, a distinguished man in his 60s who had served the royal family for decades, gestured for Morrison to take a seat across from his imposing mahogany desk. Morrison began his presentation with careful respect, acknowledging the Lord Chamberlain's authority, while making it clear that he was raising serious concerns about proper protocol. He outlined his long service record and his close working relationship with the late Queen, establishing his credibility as someone who truly understood her wishes and values. The security officer then presented his carefully researched case against the Range Rover transfer. He explained how the vehicle had been far more than just transportation for Queen Elizabeth. It had been a cherished possession that provided her with independence and joy during her final years. He quoted from the Queen's personal writings about the car and described specific occasions when she had expressed her deep attachment to it. Morrison's argument grew more passionate as he detailed the historical precedents for preserving royal possessions. He presented examples of items from previous monarchs that had been carefully maintained as part of the permanent royal collection, arguing that the Range Rover deserved the same treatment. He contended that giving away such a significant piece of royal history set a dangerous precedent that could lead to the loss of other irreplaceable items. The Lord Chamberlain listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional details about Morrison's claims. He was clearly taking the presentation seriously, understanding that the security officer's concerns touched on fundamental issues of royal protocol and the proper stewardship of the monarchy's heritage. As Morrison continued his presentation, he began to address the question of authority and proper procedure. He argued that decisions about historically significant royal property should not be made unilaterally, even by senior members of the royal family. He suggested that there should be formal consultation with experts and long-serving staff members who understood the full context and significance of such items. The security officer's voice grew stronger as he reached the climax of his argument. He stated his belief that the Range Rover should be immediately returned to the royal collection and properly preserved for future generations. He acknowledged that this might create some awkwardness with Tom Parker Bowles, but argued that the preservation of royal heritage was more important than avoiding family embarrassment. Morrison concluded his presentation by emphasizing his deep respect for the royal family and his commitment to serving their best interests. He explained that his challenge to the Range Rover transfer came not from any desire to cause trouble, but from his genuine belief that he was protecting the Queen's legacy and upholding the standards she would have expected. The Lord Chamberlain thanked Morrison for his thorough presentation and assured him that his concerns would be given serious consideration. However, he also made it clear that any decision about the Range Rover would ultimately rest with King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla. He promised to convey Morrison's arguments to the appropriate authorities and to ensure that all relevant factors were considered. As Morrison left the meeting, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. He was proud that he had presented his case professionally and comprehensively, but he was also aware that he had essentially challenged the authority of the Queen Consort. The consequences of his actions remained uncertain, and he could only hope that his arguments would be persuasive enough to bring about the return of the Range Rover. News of Morrison's meeting spread quickly through the castle staff, with supporters and critics analyzing every detail of what had transpired. Some praised his courage in standing up for the Queen's memory, while others worried that he had overstepped his bounds and put his career in jeopardy. The Lord Chamberlain spent the afternoon reviewing Morrison's documentation and considering the implications of the security officer's arguments. He recognized the validity of many of the concerns that had been raised, but he also understood the delicate political dynamics involved in challenging a decision made by the Queen Consort. That evening, the Lord Chamberlain requested a private meeting with King Charles to discuss the Range Rover controversy. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning, setting up another crucial moment in the unfolding drama. The king would soon be forced to make a decision that would affect not only the fate of the Range Rover, but also the authority of his wife and the morale of the castle staff. As night fell over Windsor Castle, the various parties involved in the controversy prepared for what could be the final act in the dispute. Morrison returned to his quarters, knowing that he had done everything possible to protect the Queen's legacy. Camilla remained confident in her position, but was beginning to sense that the situation was more complicated than she had initially realized. The stage was set for a royal decision that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. King Charles spent a restless night considering the difficult decision he would soon have to make. The Range Rover controversy had evolved from a simple family matter into a complex issue involving royal protocol, staff loyalty, and the delicate balance of authority within the monarchy. As he prepared for his morning meeting with the Lord Chamberlain, Charles knew that his decision would send important signals about how the royal household would be managed under his reign. The meeting began promptly at 9 o'clock in the king's private study, a room filled with personal mementos and family photographs that reminded Charles of his long journey to the throne. The Lord Chamberlain presented Morrison's case with professional objectivity, outlining each argument and supporting piece of evidence. He made it clear that the security officer's concerns were shared by many long-serving staff members who had worked closely with the late Queen. Charles listened carefully as the Lord Chamberlain described the emotional attachment that many staff members felt toward the Range Rover. The vehicle represented more than just a piece of royal property. It was a tangible connection to Queen Elizabeth's memory and a symbol of her independent spirit. The staff's reaction to its transfer revealed the depth of their loyalty to the late monarch and their desire to see her legacy properly preserved. The Lord Chamberlain also presented the procedural concerns that Morrison had raised about the handling of historically significant royal property. He explained how previous monarchs' possessions had been carefully catalogued and preserved, and he outlined the potential precedent that the Range Rover transfer might set for future decisions about royal heritage items. After hearing the full presentation, Charles asked several thoughtful questions about the implications of different courses of action. He was particularly interested in understanding how the staff would react to various possible outcomes, and what effect those reactions might have on the smooth operation of the royal household. He also wanted to know about the legal and constitutional aspects of royal property ownership and transfer. The king then requested time to consider the matter privately before making his decision. He asked the Lord Chamberlain to arrange separate meetings with Camilla and with Morrison later that day, wanting to hear directly from the main parties involved in the controversy. These meetings would give him the opportunity to assess their positions and to gauge their willingness to accept whatever decision he ultimately made. Charles's first meeting was with Camilla, and it proved to be one of the most difficult conversations of their marriage. Camilla arrived at the study prepared to defend her decision, but she quickly realized that the situation had become far more serious than she had anticipated. The king explained how the controversy was affecting staff morale and threatening to undermine the harmony of the royal household. Camilla initially maintained her position, arguing that she had acted within her authority as queen consort and that the staff's reaction was inappropriate and insubordinate. She pointed out that Tom had been genuinely grateful for the gift and was taking excellent care of the vehicle. She also expressed frustration that her generosity toward a family member was being treated as if it were some kind of scandal. However, as Charles gently but firmly explained the broader implications of her decision, Camilla began to understand the complexity of the situation she had created. She realized that she had underestimated the emotional significance of the Range Rover to the castle staff and the importance of following established protocols for handling royal property. The conversation between Charles and Camilla was marked by mutual respect, but also by clear tension. Both understood that the resolution of this issue would affect their relationship and Camilla's standing within the royal household. Charles made it clear that while he supported his wife, he also had to consider the broader interests of the monarchy and the feelings of loyal staff members. Later that afternoon, Charles met with Morrison in the same study. The security officer approached the meeting with a mixture of determination and apprehension, knowing that his career depended on how the king received his arguments. Morrison reiterated his concerns about the Range Rover transfer but he was careful to express his respect for the royal family and his commitment to serving their best interests. Charles was impressed by Morrison's professionalism and his obvious sincerity. The security officer's long record of faithful service and his genuine attachment to the late Queen's memory were evident in every word he spoke. The king could see that Morrison's actions were motivated by loyalty rather than by any desire to cause trouble or challenge authority. During their conversation, Morrison shared some personal memories of his time serving as the Queen's security officer. He described specific occasions when he had witnessed her joy while driving the Range Rover, and he explained how the vehicle had provided her with precious moments of independence and normalcy. These stories reinforced Charles's understanding of why the staff felt so strongly about preserving the car's connection to his mother's memory. As the meeting concluded, Morrison made a final plea for the return of the Range Rover to the royal collection. He acknowledged that his request might create some family awkwardness, but he argued that protecting the Queen's legacy was worth any temporary discomfort. The security officer left the meeting feeling that he had been heard and respected, regardless of what decision the king might ultimately make. That evening, Charles found himself alone in his study, surrounded by the weight of his new responsibilities as monarch. The Range Rover controversy had become a test of his leadership and his ability to balance competing interests within the royal household. Whatever decision he made would establish important precedents for how similar situations would be handled in the future. The king spent hours considering all aspects of the situation, weighing the arguments on both sides and thinking about the long-term implications of his choice. He knew that his decision would affect not only the immediate parties involved, but also the broader culture and morale of the royal household. The fate of the Queen's beloved Range Rover had become symbolic of much larger questions about tradition, change, and the proper stewardship of royal heritage. The following morning, King Charles made his decision. After a sleepless night of careful consideration, he had concluded that the Range Rover should be returned to the royal collection, but in a way that would preserve everyone's dignity and minimize family tensions. He called the Lord Chamberlain early and outlined his plan for resolving the controversy in a manner that would satisfy the staff's concerns while showing respect for Camilla's intentions. Charles decided that he would personally speak with Tom Parker Bowles, explaining the historical significance of the Range Rover and the importance of preserving it for future generations. Rather than simply demanding the vehicle's return, the king would offer Tom a generous compensation package, including a substantial cash payment and assistance in purchasing a different luxury vehicle of his choosing. The king also planned to present the solution as a joint decision between himself and Camilla, protecting her authority while addressing the staff's concerns. He would emphasize that the return of the Range Rover was not a criticism of Camilla's generosity, but rather a recognition of the vehicle's unique historical importance that had not been fully appreciated when the original decision was made. Charles arranged for a private meeting with Camilla to discuss his proposed solution before implementing it. This conversation was crucial, as he needed her support to make the plan work effectively. When they met, Charles carefully explained his reasoning, emphasizing how the solution would protect her reputation while resolving the staff controversy. Initially, Camilla was reluctant to accept the king's proposal, feeling that it would make her appear weak and indecisive. She worried that reversing her decision would undermine her authority and encourage future challenges to her judgment. However, Charles patiently explained how the solution would actually strengthen her position by showing her wisdom and flexibility in handling a complex situation. The king pointed out that by agreeing to the return of the Range Rover, Camilla would demonstrate her respect for royal traditions and her willingness to listen to the concerns of loyal staff members. He argued that this approach would actually enhance her standing within the royal household rather than diminish it. After much discussion, Camilla agreed to support Charles's solution, recognizing that it offered the best path forward for everyone involved. She understood that the controversy had grown beyond what she had initially anticipated, and that a graceful resolution was in everyone's best interests. Charles then called Tom Parker Bowles and arranged a meeting at the castle. When Tom arrived, the king explained the situation with characteristic tact and diplomacy. He praised Tom's respectful acceptance of the original gift and emphasized that the request for the vehicle's return was not a reflection on him personally, but rather a response to concerns about preserving royal heritage. Tom was initially disappointed by the request, as he had grown quite attached to the Range Rover during his brief ownership. However, when Charles explained the historical significance of the vehicle and the strong feelings it had aroused among the castle staff, Tom graciously agreed to return it. The generous compensation package that Charles offered helped to ease any financial disappointment he might have felt. The next crucial conversation was with Morrison and the other concerned staff members. Charles called a meeting in which he announced the return of the Range Rover to the Royal Collection, explaining the decision as a recognition of the vehicle's unique historical importance. He praised Morrison for his dedication to preserving the Queen's legacy and thanked all the staff members who had expressed their concerns. Morrison was visibly relieved and gratified by the King's decision. He felt that his efforts to protect the Queen's memory had been vindicated, and he was pleased that the Range Rover would be properly preserved for future generations. The other staff members who had supported his position also felt satisfied that their concerns had been heard and addressed. The King used the occasion to establish new protocols for handling historically significant royal property. He announced that future decisions about items with special, historical or sentimental value would involve consultation with relevant experts and long-serving staff, members who understood their full significance. Within a week, the Range Rover was back in its place in the royal garage, but now with a special plaque commemorating its importance to Queen Elizabeth's life and legacy. Plans were made to eventually display the vehicle in a royal museum, where the public could learn about its significance and the Queen's love for her countryside drives. The resolution of the Range Rover controversy had several lasting effects on the royal household. Camilla's authority was actually strengthened by her willingness to reconsider her decision and work with Charles to find a suitable solution. The staff's respect for both the King and Queen Consort increased as they saw how the couple handled a difficult situation with wisdom, and grace. Morrison's career was not only protected but enhanced by his courageous stand for preserving royal heritage. He was commended for his dedication and was later promoted to an even more senior position within the royal security team, with special responsibility for overseeing the preservation of historically significant royal items. Tom Parker Bowles, meanwhile, used the compensation he received to purchase a beautiful new Land Rover that suited his needs perfectly. He remained grateful for Camilla's original gesture and understood the reasons behind the change in circumstances. The experience actually brought him closer to the royal family, as he had demonstrated grace and understanding during a difficult situation. The Range Rover itself became a symbol of the delicate balance between tradition and change that characterizes the modern monarchy. Its return to the royal collection represented respect for the past, while the new protocols established for handling royal property showed how the institution could adapt and improve its practices. Camilla learned valuable lessons from the experience about the importance of consultation and the deep emotional connections that staff members can have to royal traditions. She became more careful about major decisions involving historically significant items, always ensuring that she understood their full significance before taking action. King Charles's handling of the controversy established him as a thoughtful and diplomatic leader who could balance competing interests while preserving the dignity of all parties involved. The incident became a case study in effective royal leadership and conflict resolution. The story of the Range Rover controversy eventually became part of castle folklore, passed down among staff members as an example of how loyalty, courage, and wisdom could triumph over misunderstanding and hasty decision-making. It demonstrated that even in the rarefied world of royalty, ordinary human emotions and attachments could play important roles in shaping events. Years later, when visitors to the Royal Museum viewed the preserved Range Rover and learned about Queen Elizabeth's love for the vehicle, many would also hear the story of how it was nearly lost and then saved through the dedication of a loyal security officer and the wisdom of a king who understood the importance of listening to those who serve the crown. The Range Rover sat quietly in its honored place, its green paint still gleaming and its leather seats still carrying the faint scent of lavender. It remained a tangible connection to a beloved queen's memory and a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, even when doing so requires great courage and comes with significant personal risk. The controversy had lasted only a few weeks, but its resolution had strengthened the royal household and established new traditions that would benefit the monarchy for generations to come. In the end, everyone involved could take pride in how they had handled a difficult situation with honor and integrity, proving that even the most complex royal disputes could be resolved through patience, understanding, and mutual respect.